In the latest on-farm story for Farmers Weekly, Grant McNaughton's path to farm ownership did not follow the most orthodox route, but it clearly worked. Grant has always been involved in the agricultural world in some form, growing up on a sheep and beef farm in North Otago, then attending Lincoln University, and now today has led to Grant and his wife Charlotte owning the Dasher Station, 6,300 hectare high country pastoral lease property at Karu Hill on the eastern end of the Kakanui Range. This is the border between North Otago and Central Otago. The reason I wanted to reach out to Grant, of course, a fantastic on-farm story, is about the current environment that we farm and grow in, following, of course, the latest election result and where the next 3 years go. But in particular, what caught me was his quote from his on-farm story video. You can check out at farmersweekly.co.nz, and if you were just watching, you would have seen. Our attitude determines our altitude. This is the quote that stood out for me the most. Now, we are joined by Grant. Evening, Grant. I want to sort of take our listeners and viewers on a bit of a journey and from Waitaki Boys in Oamaru, but there must have been multiple major influential people along your journey to shape your attitude and your approach to challenges. That's sort of where I'd like you to start.
Yeah, definitely, Sarah. Thanks for having us along. We've always tried to align ourselves with great people that have been inspirational and helped mentor us along the way. So everyone's played their little bit, but it's certainly been a long-term goal to be owning our own farm. And just, I think we owe to everyone to have an attitude of a glass half full and half empty in essentially, especially the environment we're in at the moment. So it's just being positive about it and sticking to those goals and working forward. What
do you mean by the quote, your attitude is your altitude?
Well, I think as farmers, we can definitely have the conversation of collectively, it's too dry, it's too wet, and really we can't control those things. So it's about what we can control, and one thing we can control is our attitude. So as long as we've got a positive attitude, you wake up in the morning and the day's always going to be a hang of a lot more positive if you've got a positive attitude about it, as opposed to it's going to be a terrible day. And I think in the current world, with mental health such a big issue, we've actually got to put that foremost and forefront for everyone.
Okay, so we're talking about dealing with change, and change is coming down the barrel at farmers and growers here in New Zealand with a lot of regulation change, in particular fresh water. When you're having conversations, I believe strongly that it's an attitude, not an age thing, and that there's a lot of people that are our age, Grant, that are poles apart, and there's people with attitudes in their 60s and 70s that are poles apart. So therefore, when you do have friends of all ages in the farming sector, how do you actually sit down with them and go, you know what, there is another way that we can see this and approach it, and particularly when the bank's knocking on your door?
Yeah, I think it's about everyone doing their own little bit. Understandably, there's people out there that probably are doing a really bad job and people that are doing an exceptional job. So I think it's actually about not lifting the bar but raising the floor in terms of how everyone handles their bit on farm. So I think you've actually got to look inwards before you look outwards. So you've got to look at yourself and your own business. And Charlotte and I do this all the time, looking at what we're doing first before we can blame someone else. So I think if we all do our own little bit and make those incremental gains, as an industry, we'll move forward immensely.
Can you speak us through the Dasher Station pastoral lease has got its own challenges as opposed to freehold. So what have you been able to control to enhance the environment on farms since you've taken over?
We've just tried to do the basics, Sarah. We've really just looked at our fertiliser program, subdivision, our stocking policies, and just chipped away at doing the basics of farming, feeding our stock well. We've got a couple of core philosophies we guide our principles by: Manaaki Whenua, Manaaki Tangata. So looking after the land, looking after the people. And we feel if we do that, it'll repay itself to us. So just trying to be a good custodian in the land. And so far, so good. The bank hasn't chased us off yet.
Let's talk about this, in terms of you have previously worked for Ravensdown, and from the learnings from those days to where they are now, what I'd like to ask is, you've been in that position of working alongside farmers and guiding them with change to being on the other foot. How does the rural service supply industry support farmers through these changes?
Yeah, I think the rural service supply has got a huge role to play. Definitely it's a relationship business, farming with our suppliers, and I think we've just got to work alongside them. They've got to provide us with some sort of expertise and guidance, and along with our levy payers, our beef and lambs, dairy and Zs, I think they've really got to step up to the plate and be accountable for our levies that we're paying to them, because essentially that's where we need to see the R&D, because it's a most important part of our business going forward and our licence to operate.
I do want to talk to you about that in particular. I saw a press release came through today, an extreme dry toolkit from Beef and Lamb New Zealand. A lot of last season was critical of who making very tough decisions and encouraging to do that earlier. The current framework of our industry, though, makes it extremely hard to quit when there's so many uncertainties. What would your advice be to farmers, particularly farming in an environment like North Otago on the boundary of Central Otago?
Yeah, I think everyone knows their farming system best, but for us, we always have options to go to. And we'll have set dates in the calendar where if it hasn't rained by X, we'll make a decision and we'll move on. So I think it's actually setting a time frame, setting priorities, and then making that decision and sticking with it. And as soon as you've made that decision, put the paper in the drawer and just move on. Because that's an attitude thing. Because if you start dwelling on it and say, I've lost money or I've made a bad decision or it's rained the next day, you're always looking in the rear vision mirror and not looking at the front windscreen, which in my opinion comes back to that attitude comment. That's where we need to be looking. We just need to keep looking forward.
would love to close on our attitude as an industry to a large democratic process that happened, which was our election, where society decided the current government in an unprecedented result, signalling to the industry what they want. How does it feel when there is talk that the rural community did so to vote out the Greens, yet there is 10 plus 2 ministerial portfolios to keep them there at the table? How do you feel? It's not like you're about to retire out of the industry. This is the next 20, 30 years and further on as well in your next generation. Is this a signal that this is here to stay?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, Sarah. I think you've just got to look at the past to look to the future. And there's been changes for the last 20, 40, 60 years. Go back to the 80s and look at how farming's innovated through it. So I think we've just got to look at ourselves and look at how we can innovate, how we can be smarter and work with the changes. And at the end of the day, there's going to be stuff that we're not going to like, but we're just going to have to adapt. But I just hope as a country, we don't become a country of can't do's. The old number 8 wild mentality of New Zealand was we can do it, we can get through it. And we just don't want to change our psyche to that negative mindset again of we can't do it. So I think as long as we're positive, we'll punch through and out the other side.
If we've got role models in the industry like you, Grant, we certainly will be able to keep that attitude at the forefront to alleviate us to higher altitudes. Check it out, the latest on-farm story on farmersweekly.co.nz. Of course, you can search and follow those on-farm stories, beautifully produced by Ash there, who travels around the country sharing the wonderful stories, which I need to let you know are broadcast within our schools around this country as an amazing resource as well. And when you've got role models like Grant and Charlotte McNaughton at the Dasher station speaking the way that they do, it's very inspirational. So check it out.
This is Sarah's Country.